In the next series of videos, we're going to be working on a project where we're going to be creating an animation. This is going to be a little bit of a longer sort of project, so I'm going to break it into sections. Before we get started working on this project, let me just show you a preview of what we're going to be creating in the next series of lectures. Before I get started working in After Effects, I did want to take time to show you my Illustrator file so that you can see exactly how I set up the Illustrator file in preparation for use within After Effects. Let's take a look. Here's the Illustrator file, and the important thing I want you to notice is how I've set up my layers. Every element that I want to animate uniquely exists on its own separate layer. I'll go ahead and turn off all the layers so that I can show you them one by one. I have my tagline, my umbrella, my logo text, I have my snail body, my snail shell, and then I have a smiling mouth. I've also created several instances of different sorts of mouths. So I have a surprise mouth, I have a few instances of the snail whistling. This is where the snail starts to whistle. Then I have a second instance where a little bit more air is coming through. And then I have my final whistle where he's really tooting away. And I have a little bit of a whistle air, which you can see a little bit better if we turn off these other layers. I just wanted to show the velocity at which this little guy was blowing air through his mouth. Finally, I have eye irritated, I have an eye wink, and then I have 3 clouds that I want to be able to animate independently as well. Taking time to think about how you want your character to move and which parts you're going to want to be able to control independently with animation is really important, since the organization of your layers is going to directly translate with how these elements will come into After Effects and how you'll be able to select them uniquely and finally add animation. All the layers are currently on that I want to show when I import this into After Effects. I'm just going to resave my file, and let's import this into After Effects. Back in After Effects, I have a brand new project, so before I start doing any sort of animation, I'm going to import in my file. I'll start off by double-clicking in the project window, which will allow me to import. I'm going to navigate into the folder that contains the elements that I want to use in this project. I'll select the file that we were just looking at. I'm going to import this as a composition, and I'll retain layer styles, and then I'll go ahead and click Open. As you can see, After Effects creates a composition for me, and all of the layers that we had within Illustrator are present. After Effects respected the layers that I had turned off and kept those hidden, but they are still part of the file. In addition to the composition, After Effects created a folder for me, and this contains all the unique layers as individual elements. If we click on any of these, they will open and you can see the individual art item as its own image within After Effects. I'll close this up, and we're going to just have our composition fit within the window. You might notice that the background color of my composition is black, and that's because the default composition settings that After Effects has set up creates a black background color. If we go ahead and toggle on our transparency grid, you will see that this file is actually transparent. Just because the background looks black, the file actually has a transparent background. What I will do is I'll go ahead and create a solid because I'm going to ultimately want to animate the background color slightly. I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid, and we're going to go ahead and make our solid a light blue, so I'll click OK. I'm going to drag this solid all the way down to the bottom of the stack so it appears underneath everything else. And then we're going to go ahead and make sure that nothing is selected inside of our timeline. So I'm just going to click away, and I'll use my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to create a rectangle that's going to serve as the ground at the bottom portion of my composition. Once I have my rectangle present, I'm going to go to the fill area and I'm going to specify that I want to use a linear gradient. When I do this, you'll see that the shape is filled with a linear gradient. In order to control the gradient, you'll click on the fill color, which will open up the gradient editor. You can select these various color stops and you can change the color right here. So you can dial this in and make whatever color you want. It also is worth mentioning that you can create multiple colors inside your gradient. So if I wanted a gradient that was 3 colors, I just click on the bottom and this will create the color stop. If you want to get rid of a color stop, you simply drag it away from the gradient. The little color stops at the top are called opacity stops, and they allow you to control the opacity of any of your colors. I'm going to leave mine at 100, and what I actually want to do is I want to swap the direction of my gradient. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to click OK, since these are the colors that I want to use. Then we're going to go into the gradient layer. My shape layer is already selected, and let's actually rename this ground. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to twirl open rectangle 1, gradient fill 1. And if we come down here, we can adjust the starting point of our gradient, which is going to control how the gradient is going to blend across the shape. This works in conjunction with the end point. And then if we want to edit the colors, we can click Edit Gradient, which is going to open up our gradient editor. And in addition to changing the colors, these are also something that you can animate. Now, one of the limitations about using the gradient fill for the shape tools is that it's really not so easy to change the direction of the gradient. There's not a really easy way to change the angle of the gradient. There are ways that you could work around it, but I want to show you something a little bit easier. With this shape selected, I'm just going to change the fill back to a solid color. And the color that we're using doesn't really matter because we're going to use a layer style to change the gradient. With this ground layer selected, I'm going to come up to Layer, Layer Styles, and we're going to choose the Gradient Overlay. This will allow us to apply a gradient overlay to any element. And you do have similar sorts of edits. So if we come down into this layer and we go to Gradient Overlay, you'll see that we have some of the same settings, but in addition to what we saw before, we have the angle of the gradient. So in this way, we can really transform the angle of the gradient. Now, it just so happened that this was set to 90 degrees, which is basically what I want. I just want to set this to different colors. So I'm going to go to Edit Gradient, which is going to open up that same gradient editor. I'll click on the various color stops, and then I'll just go ahead and pick the colors that I want to use to fill each color stop. So I'm going to pick a light tan for the first color, and then for the second color, I'm going to pick a darker brown. Then I'll go ahead and click OK. And we actually want to switch this around, so let's just go ahead and use our angle, and we'll change this to -90, which is going to make the lighter color appear at the top and the darker color at the bottom. In addition to being able to change the angle very easily, you also have other settings like style. So I'm currently using a linear gradient. We could change this to a radial gradient, and then you can control all of the attributes about this. But you also have an angle gradient available, a reflected gradient, and the diamond gradient. So there are quite a few more settings that are available with the gradient. And of course, all of these settings are something that you can keyframe. So a lot of flexibilities with using this gradient. I'm going to go ahead and collapse this layer, and we're simply going to drag this layer so that it appears right above the blue solid. Now I have all of the basic elements set up in my After Effects document, and I'm ready to begin with animation. In the next coming lectures, we'll be looking at how we can actually create the animations that we're going to want to for this particular project.